Ever since the dawn of time, when humankind was back home from a hard day's work and around the campfire, we've tried to find ways to entertain ourselves. The purpose of which entertainment was to take our minds out of the harsh reality, but to also have a safe environment to hone our skills in. The sharpening of our quick, strategic and level-headed thinking could be practiced from home now. Enter board games. So, what exactly is a board game? According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, it's a game of strategy played by moving pieces on a board. Although it is true that most board games require strategic thinking, there are exclusions to the rule. And there are so many categories to classify board games in today. But what about yesterday? What is surprising is that board games could be older than or as old as written language. While written language first appears around 3400 BC, earliest found evidence of a board game date around the year 3100 BC. In 2013, Turkish archaeologists were excavating and researching at a place in the southeast of Turkey called Başarhöyük, a 5,000-year-old burial site. While excavating, they unearthed small carved stones with odd shapes and painted in different colors of green, red, blue, black and white. Some depicted dogs, pigs and pyramids, while others bullet-shaped carved stones. Even though there were similar findings in northeastern Syria and Iraq, they were all isolated, single objects which the researchers believed to be counting stones. The Başarhöyük pieces, however, were found all together in the same cluster, which gave more credence to the hypothesis that it is a proto-board game of sorts, the strategy and rules of which still elude us. A full board game, however, with surviving pieces and an intact board was found in Egypt. It was called Senet, which means passage or gateway in ancient Egyptian. Although archaeologists think that the full name of the game might have been the Game of Passing. The oldest surviving boards of Senet date around 2000 to 1700 BC. The board game, however, is depicted in hieroglyphs and murals at least 1100 years earlier. At least by the time of the New Kingdom in Egypt, Senet was conceived as a representation of the journey of the Ka, the vital spark, to the afterlife. The game is also referred to in chapter 17 of the famous Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is an ancient Egyptian funerary text. The rules of the game are a subject of debate without any definitive evidence. If you aren't convinced by now that Egyptians loved board games, here is Mehen. Mehen is another board game originating in Egypt, referencing the snake deity of ancient Egyptian religion. The game board depicts a coiled snake whose body is divided into rectangular spaces. Dated around 3000 BC, besides the physical boards, this game also appears in pictures in the tomb of Hesi-Ra, and its name appears in the tomb of Rahotep. The rules of the game, however, are lost within the sands of time. Moving on, Egypt was not the only place to play the most popular of board games. Archaeological records indicate that board games were widely played in Mesopotamia too. Between the years 1922 and 1934, British archaeologists, while digging in the royal cemetery of Ur, an ancient Sumerian city present-day in Iraq, found several beautifully crafted boards. These boards were dated around the year 2550 to 2400 BC. Beautiful tokens related to the game were found arranged in a row, with the colors alternating in another Ur tomb. This board game is now called the Royal Game of Ur, and it is a two-player strategy race board game. The rules of the Game of Ur, as it was played in the 2nd century BC, have been preserved on a Babylonian clay tablet written by the scribe Iti Marduk Balatu. The rules are as follows. The Game of Ur is played using two sets of 7 checker-like game pieces. Movement is dice-based and the objective is to move all 7 of the pieces off the board before the enemy does. In the green squares in the middle, your pieces are not safe. If an opponent lands on your piece, it gets taken off the board and has to go back to the beginning, something like the modern game Ludo. This game might be the most popular board game in human history. Not only was it popular all across the Middle East, but boards of this game have been found in Crete, Cyprus and even in Sri Lanka. 4 game boards bearing resemblance to the game of Ur were found in the funeral chamber of the tomb of Tutankhamun. These game boards even came with small boxes to store dice and game pieces, and many also had Senet boards on their reverse sides so that the same board could be used to play either game. This game declined during late antiquity, somewhere around 5th to the 6th century AD, although surprisingly enough it survived among the Jewish population of the Indian city of Kochi, who continued playing a version of the game of Ur until the 1950s. But back during Roman times there was a popular board game called Ludus Duodecim Scriptorium, which translates to Game of 12 Markings, referring most likely to the 3 rows of 12 markings, each found on most surviving boards. Some consider it to be related to Senet, but this has not been proven without a doubt yet. Very little information about the specifics of gameplay have survived. It is known that the game was played with 3 cubic dice and each player had 15 pieces. The earliest known mention of the game is in the poems Ars Amatoria by the Roman poet Ovid, which was written somewhere between the year 1 BC and 8 AD. Well, onwards to the 6th century in Asia, during the reign of the Gupta Empire in ancient India, a local game was invented called Chaturanga. Looks familiar, doesn't it? Chaturanga means 4 divisions in Sanskrit, which in turn means 4 divisions of the military: the infantry, the cavalry, chariotry and the elephants, which would in turn evolve into the modern pawn, knight, bishop and rook. However, Chaturanga is not a direct ancestor of chess, a tad later on that. But it also has an 8x8 board, like chess, with 16 pieces for each player. Chaturanga was adopted by the Sassanid Persians somewhere in the 7th century, where it became known as Shatranj, and Shatranj from the Persians traveled to Europe, where it finally became the chess we know today. Or did it? Well, the modern rules with which we play chess today have been put down somewhere around 1475, even though the game became available in Europe as early as the 9th century. Books about the theory of how to play chess began to appear in that same century too. A Spanish churchman called Luis Ramirez de Lucena wrote a book called Repetition of Love and the Art of Playing Chess in 1497, and later on other chess masters like Pedro Damiano, Giovanni Leonardo di Bona, Giulio Cesare Polerio, Giacchino Greco and others started to develop elements of openings and analyze simple endgames. Well, after the 15th century, people seem to really have become serious and start producing impactful board games. The big bang of board games, however, was still yet to come, several centuries later. There is a several centuries worth of gap in the history of board games. Only during the 19th century do they make a comeback with Traveler's Tour through the United States and its sister game Traveler's Tour through Europe, which were published by New York City bookseller F.N.R. Lockwood in 1822 and today claims the distinction of being the first board game published in the United States. The next noteworthy game was based upon Christian morality and it was called The Mansion of Happiness. Published in 1843, it sent the players along a path of virtues and vices that led to the Mansion of Happiness, i.e. heaven. There were also some other Christian games later on, like the game of Pope and Pagan and the Siege of the Stronghold of Satan by the Christian Army in 1844. In 1860, the checkered game of life rewarded players for normal activities such as attending college, marrying and getting rich. Daily life rather than eternal life became the focus of board games. The game was the first to focus on secular virtues rather than religious virtues, and sold 40,000 copies its first year. while the most famous of all board games is undoubtedly Monopoly. Monopoly can be traced back to 1903, when American anti-monopolist Lizzie Magie created a game which was intended as an educational tool to illustrate the negative aspects of concentrating land in private monopolies. I don't really need to explain much about Monopoly since it's a very popular game. It's a common misconception though that Monopoly is a brutal game, but hardcore players know that friendships aren't ruined in Monopoly. So I ask you, have you ever heard of Diplomacy? So, Diplomacy is a game first published in 1959. It's played with 2 to 7 players. It is a board war game. It is distinctive from other board games because of its negotiation phases, during which time players form new and betray old alliances with other players. You can see where that friendship ruining element comes in. It has some high-profile fans also, including Henry Kissinger, Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury. I'd like to see them roll for initiative. And now for a game coming out of Europe, from Germany to be precise, called The Settlers of Catan. This game was published in 1995. In the standard version of the game, 3 to 4 players play the game and each of them represents settlers which establish colonies on an imaginary island called Catan. The objective of the game is to build and develop holdings while trading and acquiring new resources. Players gain points as their holdings grow, and the one who gets to 10 points first wins the game. Now in the 21st century there are loads of different board games and new ones are made every day. A quick look at Kickstarter and you see enthusiastic people with awesome ideas about the new concept for a board game waiting to become the next Risk or Monopoly. But who decides what becomes the next great thing? Maybe it's all just determined by the roll of dice. I would like to thank you for your attention. If you like my video, please click like. If you like my channel, please subscribe to keep yourself updated. I appreciate all constructive criticism, so if you want to leave feedback, please do leave in the comment section. You can also follow me on Facebook and donate to my page on Patreon if you feel like it. Be well, my friends.